Welcome to the first SY3 screencast on this new topic called Understanding Politics. And what we're going to look at in this particular video is the key concept that underpins this entire unit, the concept of power. But before we do that, let's just briefly remind ourselves of the structure of the A2 course. So in year one, remember, you did these two units. You did SY1, which was on the introductory core and youth culture, and then you did a summer exam on research methods and the mass media. And the marks that you've got from those two units, and those two units give you a combined mark out of 200, make up 50% of your final A-level grade. So the other 50% of your final grade comes from the two A2 units that we're going to be studying this year. So SY3 is the Understanding Politics topic, and we're going to be looking at that for 2 lessons a week from now until Christmas, and then 1 lesson a week in the period following Christmas. The other unit, SY4, has 2 sections. There's a section on research methods and a section on world sociology, and we're going to be spending 1 lesson a week on SY4 from now until Christmas, focusing entirely on world sociology. And then after Christmas, we'd be doing 2 lessons a week on SY4, looking at both world sociology and research methods. And remember, due to government changes, there are no January exams this year. So all exams, be it a retake or the 2 A2 exams, take place next summer. Now, the way in which I'm going to teach the SY3 topic, Understanding Politics, is to base it around 4 broad and overlapping themes and concepts. And they are the concept of power, the concept of democracy, the role of the state, and forms of political participation. So in the first part of this particular topic, I'm going to introduce you to each of these 4 themes: power, democracy, the state, and political participation. When we've finished introducing these themes, we'll then revisit them in turn and develop them in a lot more detail and with more sophistication. So the first part of the course, what I'm calling the building blocks, is an introduction designed to develop your confidence and give us secure foundations for the more complex work that will come up later on in the course. So this topic is called Understanding Politics, and as we can see here, politics is about the battle or struggle for power between different groups and individuals. And therefore the key concept that underpins this whole unit is the concept of power. In other words, the struggle to get one's own way within society. And this particular screencast is going to introduce you to different sociological conceptions of the idea of power. Now, it's really important to watch these screencasts as actively as possible. So as we go through this material, make sure that you make plenty of notes. And the influential sociologist Manuel Castells argues that power relationships are really the foundation upon which society is built upon. And he argues this because those in power built the social, political, cultural institutions within society and shaped the values and norms of societies according to their own interests and values. However, Castells argues that even in those societies where power appears to be highly concentrated, there's always the existence of counterpower. Or in other words, wherever there is domination, there is also resistance to domination. And therefore, social institutions are always the result of these constant power struggles. And Manuel Castells has been particularly interested in the use of the internet and wireless communication devices in the politics of resistance. And we've seen some really interesting uses of things like Facebook and Twitter in the politics of protest of recent years. So these pictures are related to the Arab Spring uprisings. And we've also seen the use of social media in protest movements that have emerged in more developed countries in recent years, such as the Indignados movement in Spain and the Occupy Wall Street movement that emerged in New York a couple of years ago. So let's start with a definition of power. We're going to draw upon the work of Max Weber initially, who was one of the founding fathers of sociology as a discipline. Weber defines power as a social relationship. So he says that power exists when person A can get person B to do something that person B otherwise would not have done. So power in Weberian terms is about this kind of ability to get your own way even when other people resist. Now there are two main questions that sociologists ask about power, and we're going to look at each of these questions briefly in the rest of this screencast. So this first question that we'll look at is, how do people actually get power? And Weber identified two main sources of power within society. Firstly, you've got what he calls coercion. Okay, this is illegitimate power that arises through the use of manipulation or force. So this is power that we would associate primarily with violence or the threat of violence. And then the other source of power, which is more legitimate, is what Weber calls authority. And this is what I've called here consensual power. This is a power relationship where people voluntarily submit to the will of others. So people will obey somebody, for example, not because they're being forced, but because they think that it's the right thing to do. And Weber identified three different types of political authority. Firstly, we've got a very personal form of authority called charismatic authority, and this is where people will obey a political leader because of their personal qualities. So well-known charismatic political leaders from recent history would include people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King. And then secondly, you've got traditional authority, which is based on the authority of deeply embedded social customs and traditions. And then thirdly, and Weber's preferred form of authority, is legal rational authority. And this is much more impersonal than charismatic authority. This is to do with the position that somebody holds within an institution rather than their personal characteristics. And the position that somebody holds within an organisation is meant to place clear limits on the power of that office holder. Now in reality, political leaders might derive their authority from a mixture of these sources. So if we take the former Prime Minister Tony Blair, obviously when he was Prime Minister he had legal rational authority, but he was also seen as quite an effective Prime Minister because of his personal charisma. Okay, let's finish this screencast by looking at this other key question that sociologists ask about the nature of power. How do people use power? How is power exercised? And according to Stephen Lukes, there are three main ways in which power is exercised, what Stephen Lukes has famously called the three faces of power. And they are decision making, agenda management, which is also sometimes called non-decision making, and then the manipulation of wishes, which is what sociologists would often refer to as ideological power. So the first phase of power is decision making, and this is the most obvious, the most visible, the most measurable form of power. And it's about the ability of individuals or groups to make, influence and implement decisions which affect other people within society. So hopefully you recognise this particular image of Parliament at the House of Commons, the 650 members of Parliament who are entitled to sit in this chamber obviously have decision-making power because they can make laws, implement decisions which affect other people. And then the second phase of power is often not as visible, is often more subtle, but is just as important according to Stephen Lukes. And this is what is called agenda management or non-decision making, and this is the ability of groups and individuals to set the political agenda and to perhaps place limitations on the issues that are discussed. And of course we could argue that the media play a particularly important role in terms of this type of power. So the media have quite a bit of influence in our society in laying down the list of subjects for public discussion. And then finally, but most importantly for Stephen Lukes, we've got the third face of power, okay, the manipulation of wishes. And this is the type of power that most sociologists would refer to as ideological power. And according to Manuel Castells, this type of power is the ability to shape people's minds in terms that favour the interests of the power holders. Or in other words, if I think as you want me to think, then you've got tremendous power over me. So for Manuel Castells, the fundamental struggle for power within society is always about the minds of the people. Any power that is based exclusively on coercion and intimidation, according to Castells, is ultimately a weak form of power. The critical battle is about what happens in our minds. Okay, hopefully as usual you've made some really good notes during the course of this screencast, and you might just want to check before we finish that you can now define power, drawing upon Weber's definition, that you can explain the difference between coercion and authority and identify the three different types of authority that we've discussed, and that you can also describe the three ways in which power is exercised according to Stephen Lukes, the three faces of power. So in your lessons, what we're going to start to do is develop some of this work that we've started on the concept of power, and then what we do in the next part of the building blocks course is move on to consider the theme of democracy.